Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first of three programs for the spring semester offered by the Institute for Jewish Catholic Relations. My name is Phil Cunningham. I am the co-director of the Institute with my colleague and friend, Adam Gregerman. We're pleased to welcome you, and I am happy to introduce our guest speaker who comes all the way from Naples, Italy, who is here this year as the Corcoran Chair. Excuse me, not the Corcoran Chair, the McLean. There's so many McShanes. McLean Chair here. So he's in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies for the year. He was born in Ravenna, Italy, and he entered the Jesuit order in 1983. He earned his Master in Philosophy degree at the Sacred Heart University in Milan and studied theology in Germany at Frankfurt and at Tübingen, where he received his doctorate at the Jesuit School of Philosophy and Theology in Frankfurt. He wrote a doctoral dissertation on the concept of analogy in the theology of the Lutheran theologian who passed away recently, Eberhard Jungel. He has been very involved in ecumenical relations within the Christian community, as well as interreligious relations, particularly between Catholics and Jews, which is actually where I first met him in 2008, I think, in a conference in Rome that was a Catholic Jewish conference, or beginning of a research project, actually, on Christ Jesus and the Jewish people today, which eventually produced a book. He most recently has been at the Cappella Universitaria La Sapienza in Rome, and also has been teaching in Naples University for many, many years, but we're happy to have him here with us at St. Joe's for this entire year. So tonight, as you can see from the title, we're going to hear a bit about what Christians and Jews can contribute and how they can work together in a very different world that none of us had ever experienced before, namely a post-religious and post-physicalist world. So with that, please welcome Father Paolo Gamberini, please.
Oh, good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight for this lecture. First of all, because Philip, as he mentioned at the very beginning, we met in Aricia. Aricia is not too far away from Rome, but is on the hills around Rome. And it's very typical for a good wine, a good white wine, very fresh. And that was during the summer season. So you can match, the heat of the weather and the fresh, cool white wine. And that is part of what the experience of this Jewish Christian dialogue group was in Aricia. But one other thing that Philip did not mention, and I would like to highlight, my first experience with the Jewish community was way back in Milan, 1980. I'm not sure if some of you have visited Milan. In Milan, there is a road. It's called Via Eupili, number 6. There is the Center for Jewish Studies. So all the journals, all the literature that have been published, mainly in Italy, but also from abroad, is kept in this library. And there I met a lot of Jewish people that met a person with whom I'm quite related. I know the daughter, and I met also his wife. And the person that I want to remember, because I mentioned at the very beginning in the brochure, is Abraham Joshua Heschel. I still remember the visit in New York at his wife's house, and she played piano for me. Because she said, "Oh, you are from Italy, you like music. Just sit and I will play piano for you." And I tell you, I never understood better Heschel by hearing music as she played. And why Heschel? Because Heschel has given me, an understanding of the Jewish community. Especially, I want to be very honest. I'm a little Hasidic. And I attended the Hasidic community in Milan, and I still remember, I still feel the, I call it goosebumps, because we were outside this, the place where the prayer was behold, waiting for the Shabbat to come, waiting to enter and to sing and to move and to praise. You got that feeling. And that is wonderful. And that kind of itlahavut, a beautiful term by Baal Shem Tov, itlahavut, which means, translated in Greek, enthusiasm, which is entheo, stay in God, the experience that we are one in God. Why all this? Heschel, Hasidic, mysticism, and post-religious and post-physicalism. Because I tell you, we are living a moment in history in Western world which is amazing. And I would like to guide you a little bit in a journey that in these past years I've been doing. So it's a particular perspective of the journey. It's a journey of an Italian, a Catholic, a Jesuit, a priest, but in love with your tradition. Christianity and Judaism in a post-religious and post-physical world. I would like to give you the outlines for tonight's conference. First of all, I will spend a few words about where we are in a post-religious and secular age. And the second will be a glimpse into the post-physicalist world. Perhaps it's a word strange. I will try to be simple, not only for you, new here, but also for some of the students that are present here, in order to break this part of information with you. And then number 3 and number 4 will be a kind of proposal. We are living in this age, but with a tradition, word that is Kabbalah, a tradition, but not only Kabbalah, but also our Christian tradition, and the figure of the Christ, the cosmic Christ, is at the center. And how this path can help us to breathe with all our lungs, Eastern and West, Jewish and Christian, into today's world. And the fourth will be a transdisciplinary mysticism, tapping from Pope Francis' new insight. How can science, theology, philosophy, the science together deepen into the ocean of Ein Sof, the infinite? First of all, at the beginning of January, I spent a few days in Italy, and especially in Milan, and for a series of conferences. And on the 10th of January of this year, it happened that at my alma mater university, University La Cattolica, came to give a talk. This guy here, I'm not sure if you recognize the picture, is Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor is very famous for a book called The Secular Age. Just in few words, what is the point of this thick volume, 1,200 pages, written by Charles Taylor? Taylor says that we are living in a secular age. That means that the coupling between two words, Christianity and religion, is no more available. is the end of Christianity as a religion. Secularization has to mean really what this uncoupling has occurred, has happened. That is, Christianity is no more religion. And he says in many of his books, but especially in the secular age, and this was his contribution at this conference that was held this January in Milan. He said the secular age gives the possibility to modify our forms of spirituality. Secular age, secular, when we hear that word, we mean, oh, we are in a bad time. Christianity or any kind of other religions is losing ground. No, it's a time of opportunity. It's a time to experience, I'd say, radically religion. Radically in the etymological meaning of the word, which means radix, the roots of religion. And what is interesting is that these two words that have been becoming like a mantra in our age. Have you ever heard the so-called mantra, spiritual but not religious? Okay? As if these two words now, they do not fight, but spirituality as the root of any religion, to go deeper. So let's go to post-religious and secular age. You got here this, he's a priest from Prague. He's a theologian, but at the same time, he's a sociologist. And he keeps on talking about secularization. Secularization prompts a divorce of Christianity from religion. That means less people, perhaps in the churches, in the pews. Christianity or Catholic faith, I speak also for Italy, is no more the point of reference of the culture. We may say marginalized. But Thomas Hadlick sees this phenomenon as a salvation, not as a death. Why? Because as a way to retrieve the roots of spirituality, as I mentioned before. There is an interesting sentence by the Church Fathers. Perhaps some of you have heard this kind of refrain. God became man is the word used by the Church Fathers. They were not in language so inclusive, but I keep it, the quotation as it is, all right? God became man so that man might become God. This has been a refrain since the time of Irenaeus. So we are in the 2nd century. And what does it mean? It means, first of all, one experience. God became man, and as Christians, we remember immediately a letter that Paul wrote to the Philippians, chapter 2. Though he was in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself. It has to do with the word kenosis, incarnation of God as kenosis. It's a key word in Pauline letters, is a key word for Christianity, and the idea held by some of these Western philosophers and theologians, like Gianni Vattimo, another Italian philosopher, and Jean-Luc Marion is a French theologian. The idea that secularization is nothing but the enactment of Christianity. So it's not a bad child born within Christianity, but it's the outcome of Christianity. Why? Because Christianity has in the very core God becoming human. It's a kind of leaving aside sacrality to become profane. So the distinction between sacred and profane, we would say God and humanity, this kind of distinction in the way of understanding the kenosis is no more available. There is a oneness, but still a oneness that has not reached the final destination. The final destination, we get it here. The incarnation of God, okay, as we contemplate in the first quotation I gave of Philippians, is realized in Matthew 25. Have you heard this passage of the Last Judgment? Very interesting. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me. You see there the me, which has to do with my neighbor. So if we keep the kenosis until the end, not only became human, but God became my neighbor. And we cannot but tap from one of your Jewish heritage philosopher very deep into this insight, Emmanuel Levinas, the face as revelation of God. And as I said, God became human. But what is interesting is that we are getting into the second movement. That means that so that humanity, let's speak also about creation, become God. I just quote Stuart Kaufman. He's a theoretical biologist, and now he's emeritus professor of biochemistry here at the University of Pennsylvania. He said in one of his amazing book, is Reinventing the Sacred, is a book where he tries to rethink God in biology, in autopoiesis, to see God with another name, and the other name is creativity. And he says in this book, God is our chosen name for the ceaseless creativity in the natural universe, biosphere, and human cultures. You feel it there? You feel that he grasps, he perceives the mystery with a name which is very inside our vision of God, creativity. And I like to break the word creativity, creativiti, I spell it correctly, I hope, with creativity. So creativity is the activity of God, ongoing activity in the world. And the other author that I cannot but quote, since he's a Jesuit, is Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin, he has this amazing vision. He was a paleontologist, a mystical at the same time, because he could listen to the spirit frozen in matter. And he says, Teilhard de Chardin, God does not make the world. He makes things make themselves. The creativity is shared with creation, with each one of these creatures. So God became human, all right, but in order that, so that human and, let me say, creation might return into God. And I press the gear, might become God in a non-dual perspective. As you see here, a kind of visualization of what we are going to grasp in the second step in a post-physicalist world. The form in which Christianity understands itself is within an age where science is discovering two major dimensions of reality. The first dimension that is perceived is connectivity, and especially in quantum physics. Everything is connected. And the other aspect is consciousness. Everything has a base of, let we call it, I would call it spirituality. Before I was mentioning Teilhard de Chardin about matter as frozen spirits, I would say that everything is overwhelmed with this divine consciousness. Let's go to the post-physicalist world. First of all, last year, 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics has been awarded to Alan Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger, and whose collective works confirm that quantum theory is right.
Professor Thors Hans Hansson, member of the Nobel Committee, please explain what is this year's prize about?
This year's prize is about quantum mechanics, and I'm sure you've heard of quantum mechanics, and it usually is portrayed as something which is sort of very weird, very mystical. And it's true, there are weird and almost mystical aspects of it, but this year's prize is for work that has made clear what quantum mechanics really means. And the really sort of funny thing with quantum mechanics is that normally you think when you have, if you have sort of, say, billiard balls or something, you have one ball here, you have one ball there, you have one ball there. And you can look at this ball and you can say, is it red or yellow or white? And you can look at it and it's red, yellow and white. It has nothing to do with the other balls. And then you can look at one of the others and see, what color does that have? In quantum mechanics, it works differently. You can have quantum mechanical states which are called entangled. And then, when they are entangled, then you cannot just look at this one and say it's yellow without somehow affecting what is happening to the other one. This is a very, very strange property of quantum mechanics. And what this year's prize laureates have done is to sort of and make us understand a bit better about what is going on, understand more about the nature, this peculiar feature of quantum mechanics.
And how does it affect our daily lives or our lives?
As you see here, a kind of virtual image, a sort of a simulation, reality in its very core is connectivity. And what we think is just, in quantum physics, is a particle, is nothing but the outcome of observation, of measurement. But the base, the matrix, I would call it, is connectivity. And this kind of perception of reality, which gives us a different glimpse of what can be our understanding of reality itself. I make with one example. Sorry, it's very easy, but has quite physical implication. What you see there, for this guy on my left is what kind of number? 6. And for this guy here, what kind of number is that? 9. So what you have right in the center, 6 or 9? 6 or 9. What do you got there in the middle? You got both, because it depends on the observation. We have the observer, is what is very important for any kind of measurement. And secondly, what we may call it reality. But reality is in itself defined by probability, by being undetermined. And not only, but what we call it as physicality is something that has no standalone existence, because it exists, physicality, only in observation. And this has, it's what in quantum mechanics is portrayed, but it overturns the physicalist understanding of reality. And what is interesting is that if we ask, what is there? This is the question that is interesting. Both philosophy and science are questioning. What is there? Is neither nor. It's interesting that there is an author, a medieval author, Thomas Aquinas, and I know that usually we associate medieval stuff with, Middle Age, between the glorious past and the glorious Renaissance. Well, medieval thought was interesting. Why? There is a kind of flow there. I call it Neoplatonic, which has a lot of meaning for the questions we are raising right now here. Thomas Aquinas has this interesting quotation. He uses an image. The question is, do we have our soul or our mind within our body, or our body is within our mind? And he says, although corporeal things are said to be in another, as in that which contains them, nevertheless spiritual things contain those things in which they are, as the soul contains body. And so also God is in things containing them, nevertheless, by a certain similitude to corporeal things, it is said that all things are in God, inasmuch as they are contained by Him. Once again, Enthel. Once again, the spark of Itlahavut. Once again, enthusiasm, which means that kind of joy of realizing that Deus semper maius. In English, there are two words. One is, Latin. The other is more, I guess, Anglo-Saxon. Have you ever noticed that these two words have something similar? One is substance. What is substance? What is below? What stand underneath? And you have the word understand, which means standing under. And it's interesting because these two words just highlight for us a way of perceiving that the whole reality is kept by logos, which is normally translated into reason. Logos into reason, into word. In the word, everything stands. But what is this word that this logos from the Greek legein, which means connecting? Why we reason? Because we connect things. That is what is logical. Things that are illogical are things that cannot be connected. And so reality is within this womb of consciousness. Here we have a kind of image. Once again, I like a lot of pictures, images, and it can be helpful. What's interesting is that in this image, just call it reality, the flow of reality, the flow of consciousness, the flow of physis, fuel, which means generation, flowing. And what all these ripples, all these drops, as, let's say, making visible of the invisible. Making visible of what is invisible. And I guess most of you, at least part of the audience, know Hebrew. Leolam, olam, olam, which means both world, but means also the eternal. And as they say, there is a root there, alam, to conceal, to hide. And another thing that which is quite interesting, I want to quote here Genesis 1 and 2. Do you remember this verse? Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. God has not created the water, has divided the water above and below. Pelagus divinus. Church fathers have called, for example, Gregory of Nyssa. God has this ocean of consciousness. And, but it's amazing because this image you see here has to do again within the perspective of quantum physics, the potentiality. The potentiality which is quantum vacuum in quantums. José Cordovero is an interesting guy. And please devotedly listen to this sentence. It's quoted by Daniel Matt, perhaps you heard. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Ein Sof exists in each existent. Do not say this is a stone and not God. God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. We are in 17th century, 1600. And it's interesting that that would be interesting to make a research on that. José Cordovero speaks about this is a stone and not God. He says, God forbid it. And this is a Jewish Kabbalist. The same in 15th century, so 1 century before, Deus lapis in lapide, which means God is God in the stone. And this is Nicholas of Cusa, a cardinal of the Catholic Church, using the same wordings. Do you see that there is an underneath current of life, of spirituality, pervading all the islands of our religions? It is a vision. But I want to be fair. I want to be fair. Do you acknowledge this guy? This is Spinoza. Perhaps you know all his history. Lately has been published a book by Claire Carlyle, which is very inspiring. If you are interested to know something more about Spinoza, it's a very easy book, but inspirational book of philosophy. And she says, I quote from her book, if the 17th century churches had been receptive to Spinoza, he could have saved Christianity from the ravages of secularism to come. Instead, both Jews and Christians alike denounced him as an atheist. We missed the opportunity. We missed the opportunity. And that is always the case when people are considered heretical, separated. And by separating, we don't learn this crazy transgressive power of God. And as I said, not only Cordovero, but I want to quote also William Blake. Listen how he looks at reality. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And resounds, I'm tapping once again from our Jesuit tradition, sorry for that, John Hopkins. He says in that beautiful poem, which perhaps you know it, the world is charged with the grandeur of God, the Holy Ghost over the band world broods with warm breast and with her bright wings. Genesis 1:2. The same vision. You feel it here, the power. Tapping from the same source. So you know why wine is good. Let's go to the third movement, the Jewish Christian mystical path.
Let's do definitions of mysticism.
I think it's important, yeah.
I'll say mysticism is the nagging suspicion that the apparent brokenness, discord, disunity, disharmony that assault any sensitive person every day, in truth conceal a hidden unity. The suspicion that, no, it's all one. It doesn't look like it's one, but I get a glimmer, I think it's all one.
No, that's beautiful. My own definition, if one wants to give one, would focus on that glimmer that you speak about. One gets a glimmer, you said. So I would speak of mysticism definitely as an experience. There has to be an experience, because otherwise it's just talking about mysticism. But mysticism itself is an experience, and it's an experience of communion. That's where you say the unity of all. Mm-hmm. It's an experience of communion with the ultimate. My communion with the ultimate.
So I get
Communion with the ultimate. ultimate who is connected with all and with every single parts, and every single part of this whole is at the same time in communion with everything else. This two words, spiritual but not religious, has as an add up, it comes from our soul. Where here, our soul, just let it be, is a resonance. And I will mention in a few moments to the experience in the Kabbalah experience of the Yechidah, the union deep with God, which is in the mystical tradition of Christianity, the experience of the scintilla, of the spark, of the Funkeln in Meister Eckhart. Let's go to the Zohar. Here you got, I put the edition by Daniel Matt. But please, if you are interested in these themes, if you are passionate of science and mysticism in a very, how do you say, itlahavut, with passion, just watch some of the YouTube videos by Daniel Matt. He has been my professor at GTU in Berkeley, and I do remember their classes. And when somebody teaches out of the depth remains in you. One of the central idea of the Kabbalah, Lurianic tradition, is that Tzimtzum, which can mean two words. On one side, it can be withdrawal, step back. It can be also contraction. Now I give you an example. It's just take it as easy it is. So it cannot be much of what is shown. Let's take that as the infinity. The infinity of the glorious light of God, and Sof Aor, the infinite light. And in the Kabbalistic perspective, this light has been withdrawn. Why? Because Ein Sof is Ein Sof letting be the world, the cosmos. And in this cosmos, that comes the other word, which, as I said before, is the contraction. By withdrawing, the light of God has been contracted in one point. And that is, Hildegard of Bingen speaks of a nutshell which is held by God in the palm of her hand. And here, Ein Sof, which means nothingness. And I let resonate the link with the post-physicalist perspective of the quantum vacuum as nothingness. But I let it there. The being presence of God, you see, God has become absent in the world. Olam, concealed. It's like when you have the sun, and the sun is so bright. In order that the sun may be revealed, it must be concealed. Because only by concealing with an interface, I can see the sun. Otherwise, I cannot see it. Revealing by concealing. And here you got a picture of the leftover glow from the Big Bang permeates the entire universe. You see the traces of the Big Bang, of the light. And let there be light. Yehi or. Pope Francis, in the Laudato Si, he does not say explicitly, but he has tapped from this source of Kabbalah. When he says in number 8 of Laudato Si, the Holy Spirit can be said to possess an infinite creativity proper to the divine mind. Creating a world in need of development, God in some way sought to limit himself, hiding himself, becoming absent, so we would become presence of God. We're getting crazy. God is stepping back. God is going back to the background so I can become in the foreground. Mona Lisa. This is a beautiful portrait. And once more, there are two words in order to indicate a portrait. You, in English and in French, in German, and also in Russian, you say a portrait. And you use the verb trahere with the preposition por, which means coming forward. We, in Italian and in Spanish, we don't say portrait. We say ritratto, which means withdraw. Who are you? You are the portrait of God. And is God withdrawing so that you come forward? Heschel says in one of his books, I guess man is not alone. Do you know why God has forbidden to make an image of him? Because you should not have image. You are the image. And mitzvot. What are the mitzvot? Mitzvot, which means commandments, are imitation of God. I think we get drunk. I put here in this drawing your two words from the Kabbalistic tradition. Ein Sof, you got it here, which means infinite. Ein means nothing, okay? And Sephirot, which are the emanation, the presence of God, the 10 Sephirot, which I would compare to the lights, the colors. So the one light, the Ein Sof, which becomes the manifestation of God. It's interesting that in the Hindu Advaita tradition, we have two terms in order to identify these two moments. One is Nirguna Brahma and the other is Saguna Brahma. Brahma without qualities and the other with qualities. You see how here the dialogue, interreligious dialogue, can help to compare these different sources. But let's go to the Sephirot. It is called the Tree of Life in the tradition of a Kabbalah. And Gershom Scholem, who is the expert of Jewish mysticism, still, I guess, a powerful scholar for mysticism. He says, the 10 Sephirot constitute the mystical tree of God or tree of divine power, each representing a branch whose common root is unknown and unknown. Question: where in the Bible is said of a tree of life? In the Garden of Eden. And close by, there is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Ein Sof, good and evil. Duality and non-duality. There is something beyond knowledge. Knowledge divide, but binah, you would say, binah in Hebrew. But there is da'at, which is da'at Elohim, which means make love with God. It's a terrible word, but it's beautiful. Has to do with the Song of Song, Shir HaShirim. But Ein Sof is not only the hidden root of all root, it's also the sap of the tree. Every branch representing an attribute exists not by itself, but by the virtue of Ein Sof, the hidden God. So you see that kind of tree, and that kind of tree resembles the structure of the Adam Kadmon, the heavenly Adam. And here, let's pay attention, The manifestation of the Sephirot resembles the different parts, limbs of Adam Kadmon, of this heavenly figure. And it's an interesting connection with what we are trying to dialogue with Jewish and Christian tradition. Why? Paul is navigating into the image of the earthly Adam and the heavenly Adam. Is navigating into this, let me call it, there is a lot of studies regarding this, the apocalyptic root of the Kabbalistic understanding. And what is the major figure in the apocalyptic literature? Daniel 7:13. Ben Adam, Bar Enosh, the Son of Man. Not only that, it's interesting that another author, Ibn Arabi, he is, I think, the most outstanding scholar, theologian of the Sufi tradition. I'm not sure if you have heard, but also in the Sufi tradition, there is the idea of the perfect man, which is Nur Muhammad, is the ideal Muhammad, which is pre-existent, before creation. So go back to that kind of example I gave to you. What happens is that this very nutshell is Adam Kadmon, the cosmic Christ, the Nur Muhammad, and pre-existent, sure, but it is expanding. Is expanding by, we would say, collaborating, working with the Spirit, being one, and God will be all in all, according to Paul in the letter to the Corinthians. And I've been mentioning before the contractio in Nicholas of Cusa and the explicatio, always by Cusa. So I just want to end up by quoting three mystics. And the last one you see there is et illesum. They have in common what? The perception, the contact with this soul, connecting with, in the Yechidah, this level with the Keter, which is the first of the Sephirot, the dimension of God. Eti says, there is a really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. Sometimes I'm there too. And let's go to the last step. Transdisciplinary mysticism. I represent here in this, in this image, the different science, philosophy, theology. And Pope Francis has repeated quite often in 2019, also in Veritatis Gaudium, which is a very important text for us theologians and philosophers and people working in the university. Saints, you are doing a good job when you do interdisciplinary work. That theology speaks with philosophy, philosophy speaks with science, and so on. But Pope Francis says that's not enough. Why? Go into the depth. And the depth, he calls it, this depth, as the wisdom. He says, situating and stimulating all disciplines against the backdrop of the light and life offered by the wisdom. That is the mystical dimension. And with another image of Heschel, he says that the tree of knowledge is rooted in mystery. And so we get slowly to what I would like to read. We were speaking about an experience, because mysticism has to do with experience. Not only glimmering, but becoming one with the one. And so what is important to be connected with the root, but connected with one and another, because we are all one. As Pope Francis says, everything is interconnected. And this interconnection is something which we can find as Christians in the mind of Christ. All beings are saturated with Christ. Runner speaks about the devout Christian of the future, which will be a mystic, otherwise nothing. Why? Because there is wisdom that is penetrating every single being. Dante Alighieri, an Italian poet, speaks of love and in the paradise. And he's a poet of the 13th century. The love which moves the sun and the other stars move each one of us. Which is not only logos, but we are one. And here, Hildegard of Bingen, a mystic of the 12th century. Love gives herself to all things the most cohesive bond, most excellent in the depths and above the stars. And go back to Einstein. Have you ever noticed that the first three letters has to do with infinite? And he speaks about the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious No, it's as good as dead. Its eyes are closed. And let's enter with passion once again. The awareness of the unknown is earlier than the awareness of
Well, thank you very much, Paolo. I'm sure you'll all agree this is sort of a mind-expanding experience. Those of you who are familiar with the Institute know that we have this custom of when a speaker has made a presentation that the earthly Adam and I will ask a question or discuss things with the speaker as a way of segueing into opening up a Q&A. So Adam is going to offer some thoughts and a question or two.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much. This was, yes, mind-expanding and also really provocative. Actually,
Push the button.
there we go. Yeah. You also might get the award for the most amazing PowerPoint ever. I usually stick with a few words on a page. But so thank you. It's extremely engaging. I wanted to ask you about what seemed to me just, and maybe this is too basic a question, but a tension between God being in all and God contracting. That is, it seems to me that they don't quite go together, and I wondered if I'm either misstating one or the other, or missing the way in which God, in a sense, does both. So, let me if I could just add, there's even a pantheistic aspect to some of this, which I suspect isn't where you want to go.
Yeah. Do I answer
Yeah, sure.
immediately? I think that last time when I gave my first Meckling lecture, I spent a few minutes to that, but I just repeated with a very simple example. I usually speak of the number 10. Let's compare God with the number 10. If I take some of the operation like 5 times 2, or let's get 13 minus 3, or 5 plus 5, I have always 10. And it's the same 10 in all this. God is God in all. And it's not a little bit of God in me or in you. It's all God. But at the same time, and here is interesting for the Jewish-Christian dialogue, and it's good that it's not taped and sent to the Vatican, but it's something that I wrote in the book that I published in Italian. I hope there's going to be a translation into English. But the big issue of the Trinity, this is a very hard situation. I just want to quote Gabriele Boccaccini, who is a scholar in the apocalyptic tradition, especially the Book of Enoch. He says, for Jews, Trinity is not enough. Why? Because it's not 3, but it's 10 and more. So it means that God, 10, is God in 5 plus 5 and so on, but at the same time, it's not just one of it only. And because if that were true, then the other could not be 10. So what you call it panentheism, I would say that God is all in all, but there is a dimension of transcendence beyond. And it's interesting, really, the Kabbalistic teaching of Tzimtzum, contraction and withdrawal, and which is what we do. Breathe in, breathe out, which is our beating. Where is life? There is always these two movements. So that I would so answer to you.
So one of the words you've used a lot, I want to define, particularly for students who may not be familiar with Kabbalah and Kabbalistic and Kabbalism. This is Jewish mystical tradition, and the resonances that you're detecting between the Jewish mystical tradition, the Christian mystical tradition, Buddhist, Hindu mystical tradition, etc., is undergirding a lot of what we were talking about. So I want to zero in on something you said toward the beginning of your presentation, and it was regarding secularity or secularism. And the way you were, let me phrase a question two different ways and do with it as you will. It seemed to me that you were saying, in a sense, that Judaism and Christianity have done their work too well by enabling secularism to come into being. And what I mean by that is, and this may sound a little strange to Jewish ears, but the Jewish writer Michael Wishkegrod, of blessed memory, posited that one of the distinctive features of Judaism was that it had God involved in human history, and particularly in the flesh of Israel, and circumcision is connected to that. And of course, so it's in a sense sort of the incarnation of God in the people Israel, which of course relates to Christianity, of course, of a different, I don't want to make these terms identical, but a kind of incarnation in the person of a Jew from the first century Jesus. So you have this movement of God into history, even though God has withdrawn in order to make history and existence of history possible, but God's still wanting to, if for lack of a better verb, inject God's self into that history. And that Judaism and Christianity have both said in their respective ways, God is involved in our lives. God is involved in history. God is involved in the unfolding of the universe, to use a Teilhardian kind of thing. So that's what what I'm saying is, it seems to me you're saying that if Christianity and Judaism succeeded in making space for God in the real world, that they have in effect prepared for their own withdrawal as religions in order for secularity to exist. In other words, God is sort of infusing stuff or pervading stuff. Am I tuning into what you're saying? Kind of.
Yes, I would add this. Since I quoted that church action from the church fathers, God became human so that human can become God. And as I said quite often, let's expand it. It's not a human, but creation, okay? This is also the way Karl Rahner is reading, I can quote places in his writings where Karan does that. I say this, that secularization has done this movement, like dissolving the religiousness of Christianity. But at this moment is necessary to tap in the second movement.
Could I just ask you, could you define how you're using the word religion there?
Right.
Christianity must cease to be a religion. What do you mean by
that? Well, Christianity, the term religion has been used, let's say, in a political sense as the religio publica. It was the religion of it's a kind of identity. My ethnicity, my belonging to a certain country or to a certain tradition located in a place, also geographically. But there is also another meaning of religion, which is, once again, religare, which is connection, connecting, not only connecting with a kind of institution, but connecting with the depth, connecting with that source. So in this second way, I think that the slogan, spiritual but not religious, just want to correct the Christianities. Christianity is religion understood in the first way. In the second way, we move beyond Christianities, and Raymond Paniker would say, we go into Christ forming. And where here Christ forming is not sectarian, like to become a devout Christian. No, it began to become in this cosmic dimension. So it's not a matter of words, religion or not religion. I think it is a matter of having this insight to regain, recatch this mystical dimension, this contemplation, which is the last numbers of the chapter 6 of the Laudato Si, is all about that. Regain the contemplative approach to reality, which is not only with the subatomic, certainly, but also with my brother and sister, nature, the whole cosmos.
Yeah. We have time for a few questions, and so we would
15 minutes.
ask you to please feel free to come on up. If you could go up to the microphone, I think it's then easier to hear. So please, yeah, come on up.
We've heard different people talk about what their definition of mysticism is. How do you personally define mysticism in your own words and ideologies?
My own word. When in the morning, I wake up quite early because I like silence. I stay there for 1 hour in silence. And mysticism has to do with mule, with putting, usually there are icons, also an icon of Mary, Mother of Silence. It's putting your finger on the mule, on the lips. It means I'm abiding at the threshold of life. And for me, mysticism is nothing but attention, silencing the mind, silencing expectations, and let it be. I would say this is what I been going through in these past years about mysticism.
Thank you.
Maybe just to save time, if people want to line up by the microphones, we can make best use, but please.
Thank you, Father Gamberini. You uttered a tantalizing tidbit when you spoke of Spinoza and how he was ostracized and condemned. What is the insight that Spinoza had that we all missed?
Yeah. 3 words. To be in God is the central sentence he has been repeating in his ethics volume, which is the major work by Spinoza, and he repeats it. But there has been a kind of reading of Spinoza as if he were pantheist, Deus sive natura, perhaps you remember this, which is part of the jargon related to Spinoza. But I think what we lost is really this deep perspective that we are all one in God. And this God, okay, before tapping in with beliefs, is first of all a reality. And I quoted Ranner before. His definition of who is the Christian of the future, or we celebrate the mystic, is a mystic because he has experienced something. He has been criticized because he says he has experienced something. And someone has said, Runner, why you didn't say someone? And I say this, and here there has been a lot of debate related to Spinoza, okay? Oh, he's destroying the God of the Bible, the God of miracles, the personal God, all this. We would say the anthropomorphic God. But if you read Spinoza, you go into the depth of someone, I usually say, that has held true that all the verbs we give to God, like intelligere, volle, these are all infinite. I say God does not know, His knowledge. So you see here? And this change is what I think help us to make this second shift in secularization, to discover this depth within our spiritual tradition. And Spinoza is one of those, but there is Eckhart, there is, for example, also Giordano Bruno, and but the more I get into the mystical text of other traditions, there is a flow which is really Oceanus Pelagus Divini. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Could you?
Oh, there is a student. Yeah.
Just while we're waiting to the next person, you come up to the mic, but just could you define pantheism, because that word has come up a couple of times, and just say what it is and that what you're talking about is different from that?
Yeah. Pantheism, let's say, pan means all, everything, and theism means God. All is God. It's like if we take X and Y, they are alike. Panentheism is everything is God, but everything is in God. And everything is in God, not as a bottle in the water, but as a drop in the water. So the N in panentheism gives you sameness, but at the same time otherness. Nicholas of Cusa speaks of non-aliud. God as non-aliud is not something other, because we are in God. We are in God. And actually, we exist, but God does not exist in this way. Why? Because we are in Him. He cannot stay outside of Him, of God. So this is, I would say, a way to understand panentheism, a term that was cognated by Krause, and he's a German philosopher, and we are at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. Yes, John.
Thanks.
So you mentioned this like breathing in and out, the contracting, and I think it's fairly clear that we're in a very polarized time at the moment in the climate. Looking back, probably all the way to the Enlightenment, we've seen a significant decrease in the acceptance of God and religion. Even like people like Nietzsche were saying, God is dead and we technically, I mean, he said we killed God. Do you think that in a way, if we approach religion like that and say we kind of, I don't know if you could say reject religion, but that side of it, it would kind of be the breathe in or breathe out to this polarization that's been going on and maybe unite us and connect us in a way?
Yeah. John, I would say this. If in your life you haven't been atheist, you cannot be a true believer. And it's not only a matter of time, have been, but that part is always within. Doubt belongs to faith. It's, how do you say, it's like the salt that keeps faith alive. And I speak to you from the Jewish tradition, which is amazing, you know, the testimony of Job. And for me as a Christian, the last word of Jesus is why. And I think that if we regain this aspect, this inquiring aspect of faith, Alma de Peruda would say, Heschel, to live in this paradox, then we attain the reconciliation, which is not an easy process. No, but is a tikkun. Bring all the spread lights, and even people that are on the opposite side of who I am with my belief, they are sparking of light and trying to connect one another in dialogue, in conversation, in contrast, even if in polemic. Okay, we argue. But where is argue, there is silver. The word argue comes from argentum, argue, is splendor. And I would finish for Christian in the Bible, in the Gospel of Matthew. Do you remember the scene when there is Jesus that ascending into heaven, and the disciples, the prostrate? Translations have mistranslated. The Greek sentence says they have translated. Some have believed, and others have doubted, as if there were good and bad disciples. No. They believed and doubt. So your question has to do really with the challenge to be believer within our society, which is different from the Christianities. But that is not a sad thing, but is a chance and a grace.
Yeah.
What argument would you give that proves the existence of God, or are we just stuck that we have to believe?
You're getting a lot of head nods from the back, by the way.
Yeah. One of the argument, I can call it like that I love the most. It can be misleading, but I say it anyway, is the ontological argument, which is, in a nutshell, nothing is greater than the question you have placed right now. And even the question is a sign of meaningfulness as prior to all that initiate meaningfulness. Even the why this? Why this? Even where I doubt and I say, damn, God does not exist, your reaction has to do with the meaningfulness that is abiding everything. So for me, this has been always, in my lifetime, I was always puzzled by the question, is there any kind of easy, the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas? Or for me, this is the answer, and is related in our culture right now. I'm speaking about the great debate in science about consciousness. I'm not sure I mentioned before, but one of the way does consciousness emerge from physicality, from the brain, or vice versa. There is a Dutch philosopher who is a scientist, and he's very much also in mysticism. His name is Bernardo Castro. And he repeats something that I think is basic. Nothing outside experience. And experience implies consciousness. And here, going back to what John said before, cogito ergo sum of Descartes means just this. I cannot go beyond consciousness, and this consciousness is a name for God.
So please join me in offering our appreciation for a really provocative and interesting talk tonight. So thank you, Paolo. I just want to briefly mention that, that this is the first of a series of 3 talks this semester under the heading, of Jews and Christians, Aspects of Life in the 21st Century. We're going to range fairly widely in the different topics, but I just want to mention coming up in March, March 22nd, a Wednesday, also here at the same time in this room, is going to be a program on American Catholic attitudes towards Jews, Judaism, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with colleagues of Phil and mine at 2 other universities, Mordechai Imbari and Carol Bunham, are going to be joining us for a discussion of a large-scale quantitative survey, really the first of its kind, that Phil and I are involved in with them, basically surveying a large number of American Catholics for their views on a whole bunch of different questions on the topics I mentioned, but also on sort of Catholic views in general on theology and religious issues. It should be quite fascinating, I think. Lastly, in April 27th, Thursday night, we're going to hear from Rachel Feldman. Dr. Feldman is at Franklin and Marshall on Messianic Zionism in the Digital Age, Jews, Noahides, and an Imagined Third Temple. Very creative stuff that she's doing. Anyhow, I hope you can join us for that event. Thanks for coming.